The auctioneer kept calling it a ruin as if repeating the word would make someone else stupid enough to take it. Lot 17, he shouted over the desert wind, slapping a faded tablet against his palm. One decommissioned emergency relay bunker, partial sinkage, restricted access tunnels, unresolved power anomalies, no salvage guarantees, buyer assumes all risk. Opening bid, 50 credits. Nobody moved. The crowd standing in the cracked parking lot of the federal liquidation yard did what crowds always did when something carried a bad story. They looked away. A few smirked. One man in a polished reclamation jacket actually laughed out loud. The bunker sat a quarter-mile behind the chain fence, half buried in red dirt and scrub, a concrete hump rising from the wasteland like the spine of some dead animal too stubborn to stay underground. Rusted antenna masts leaned over it at crooked angles. Warning signs, sun-bleached almost white, still clung to the perimeter posts. Government seals had been spray-painted over years ago. One steel blast door remained visible from this distance, sealed shut beneath layers of corrosion and dust. The auctioneer lowered his voice in theatrical disappointment. No interest? None at all? This is pre-collapse infrastructure, people. Reinforced walls. Copper runs. Titanium shielding in some of the old relay systems. 50 credits. Still nothing. Jonah Vale stood near the back with both hands in his jacket pockets, doing the kind of math desperate men do so often it becomes instinct. He had 31 credits left after fuel. 27 if he wanted to eat something better than instant ration paste for the next week. His truck needed a new coolant pump. His landlord had already sent 2 messages. One more missed payment and the locks on his container unit would cycle against his code. He had not come here for a miracle. Men like Jonah stopped expecting miracles a long time ago. He had come for salvage. The good lots had gone early to the big firms with clean boots and corporate credit lines. Intact drone sheds. Weather towers. A pair of wrecked survey crawlers with usable cores. Even a cracked desalination unit had sold for more than he could dream of bidding. By the time Lot 17 came up, most of the serious buyers had either won what they wanted or written this one off as poison concrete and legal paperwork. The man in the polished jacket glanced at Jonah and shook his head, amused already by a joke that had not happened yet. The auctioneer sighed. Fine. 20 credits. Nobody moved. Jonah looked again at the bunker in the distance. Partial sinkage meant there might be lower levels protected from looters and weather. Unresolved power anomalies meant one of 2 things. Bad readings or something inside was still drawing current after all these years. Restricted access tunnels meant there were tunnels at all, which meant deeper structure, more metal, more sealed compartments, more chances that something had been missed. Or it meant a cursed hole in the dirt that would collapse on him and leave his bones for coyotes. Jonah had bought worse. 10 credits, the auctioneer snapped, losing patience. You cannot tell me I drove 3 hours into the middle of nowhere to give away reinforced federal property and no one's even willing to insult me properly. A few chuckles passed through the crowd. The wind shifted, hot and dry, carrying a strange smell from the direction of the bunker. Not rot. Not oil. Not ozone exactly either. Something colder. Something that did not belong in noon heat. Jonah frowned. Then the lot screen flickered. It was brief. So brief that half the crowd missed it. The auctioneer's tablet blinked black, then came back. One of the security poles near the fence crackled and spat a line of blue sparks. A murmur rolled through the bidders. The auctioneer slapped the side of his tablet. Cheap junk. 10 credits. Going once. Jonah stared at the bunker. He did not know why his pulse had suddenly picked up. He only knew that the shape in the dirt no longer looked abandoned. It looked patient. The polished jacket man snorted. Don't do it, whoever you are. That place has been empty since before your grandparents were born. Going twice, the auctioneer said. Jonah raised his hand. It was not dramatic. No music. No destiny cracking open in the sky. Just one tired man with cracked knuckles and a thinning bank account lifting 2 fingers because every instinct that had kept him alive in the salvage trade was now whispering the same dangerous thing. There is something in there. The auctioneer blinked as if he had not expected anyone to rescue his dignity. 10 credits from bidder 42. Do I hear 15? Silence. The polished jacket man looked over his shoulder, saw Jonah's worn boots, his patched jacket, the dust-caked old truck parked by the road, and smiled with open contempt. To men like that, poverty was not a condition. It was a character flaw. The auctioneer grinned and brought the digital hammer down. Sold. Lot 17 to bidder 42. A few people laughed as the crowd broke apart. Jonah ignored them. He signed the transfer on a plastic folding table while the federal clerk barely looked at him. He got a deed chip, a perimeter access code that might or might not still work, and a waiver long enough to make clear that if he got crushed, irradiated, electrocuted, infected, buried, or otherwise erased by whatever lay inside that bunker, the government wished him the very best of luck. By late afternoon the yard was almost empty. Jonah drove alone across the waste flats toward his purchase, his truck rattling over cracked earth and old service road plates. The bunker grew larger with every mile, uglier and more imposing than it had seemed from the auction line. It was no simple relay station. The structure spread beneath the ground in broad angular ridges, as if the earth had failed to swallow something much larger beneath it. The perimeter fence hung open where a section had collapsed inward years ago. His new access code did nothing. The exterior keypad was dead, its faceplate melted from the inside. That stopped him for exactly 10 seconds. Jonah hauled a cutter from the truck bed, slung a pry rig over one shoulder, and walked toward the blast door with the measured pace of a man who had spent his entire life earning survival the hard way. The closer he got, the more wrong the place felt. The air cooled. The wind died. The desert noise itself seemed to retreat. There were scratches on the concrete near the door. Not random damage. Not weathering. Lines. Deep parallel grooves in the old government plating, like something immense had once tried to get out. Jonah stopped. For the first time all day he considered turning around, getting back in the truck and selling the deed chip to some fool with more money than sense. Then he saw it. At the center seam of the blast door, beneath the rust and dust and age, a hair-thin line of blue light was shining from inside the bunker. Not flickering. Not dying. Watching. Jonah did not realize he was holding his breath until his lungs started to burn. The line of blue light was so thin it should have disappeared the moment he shifted his angle. It did not. It remained there in the seam of the blast door, clean and steady, like the edge of a blade pressed between two rusted slabs of steel that should have sealed decades ago. Nothing about that was possible. He stepped closer, boots scraping against concrete powdered by years of wind and heat. Up close, the door looked even older than it had from a distance, its outer layers swollen with corrosion, paint blistered away, warning markings eaten to ghosts. But the light leaking through the seam did not reflect off rust. It cut through it. Pure. Precise. Alive. Jonah crouched and ran a gloved hand near the crack. Cold. Not night air cold. Not shade cold. A deep, metallic cold that seemed to drag heat out of his skin. He pulled his hand back immediately and stared at the glove as if frost should have formed over it. The desert around him was still blistering under the dying sun. Inside that bunker, something was cold enough to fight the world. He stood there a moment longer, listening. Nothing. No hum. No machine whine. No shifting metal. No settling concrete. The whole place held its silence too carefully, as if every sound that should have lived there had been ordered to remain still. Jonah muttered to himself, mostly because hearing a human voice felt necessary. 10 credits, he said under his breath. Of course. He set the cutter down, looped the pry rig into the outer wheel lock housing and leaned in. The first yank did nothing. The second pulled free a chunk of rust the size of a dinner plate. The third made something deep inside the mechanism groan. Jonah paused, head tilted. The sound had not come from the lock. It had come from beneath his feet. A long, low vibration rolled through the concrete, so faint he might have convinced himself it was imagination if not for the dust trembling at the edges of the threshold. The blue seemed brightened by the smallest measure. Enough to notice. Enough to make the skin on the back of his neck tighten. He should have walked away then. Every smart instinct said the same thing. Mark the site. Find a partner. Bring scanners. Bring someone armed. Bring someone stupid enough to go in first. But men in Jonah's line of work did not get rich by walking away from the first impossible thing they found. They got rich by being the first idiot willing to keep pulling. He braced his boots, gritted his teeth, and put his full weight into the pry rig. The lock housing screamed. A shower of rust and fractured bolts burst outward. Then, with a sound like a vault exhaling after half a century, the blast door shifted inward by 3 inches. The blue light widened. So did the cold. It flowed out over him in a smooth, silent wave, carrying a smell unlike anything he had ever known. Not mold. Not fuel. Not burnt wire. Something sterile and ancient and sharp enough to sting the inside of his nose. Air that had never been meant for open sky. Jonah let go of the rig and stepped back instinctively. The door did not stop moving. Not fast. Not violently. It continued on its own, inch by inch, grinding against concrete with the deep patience of something immensely heavy and entirely certain of itself. Dust shook loose from the bunker ceiling. Small stones danced across the threshold. Blue light spilled through the widening gap in clean bars across the desert dirt. Jonah stared. He had not powered anything. Had not triggered any visible mechanism. The outer systems were dead. The keypad was slagged. By all rights, that door should have needed a demolition charge or a crawler winch to move it all. Instead, it was opening for him. When the gap became wide enough to slip through, the movement stopped. The silence that followed felt less like emptiness and more like attention. Jonah took the high-lumen lamp from his pack, checked the charge, then ducked sideways through the opening. The beam died the instant he crossed the threshold. Not dimmed. Died. He swore, slapped it once, twice. Nothing. Then he looked up and forgot the lamp entirely. The bunker should have been dark. Instead, a soft lattice of blue illumination traced itself across the walls and ceiling in thin branching lines, not bright enough to blind, just enough to reveal the space ahead. The entrance corridor was cast from some pale gray material smoother than poured concrete, with no seams he could spot, no exposed cable runs, no utility conduits, no rust, no dust except what had blown in behind him. The air was perfectly dry, perfectly cold, and the hallway extended far deeper than the bunker should have allowed. Jonah had seen pre-collapse military shelters before. They were ugly, practical things full of bolts, plates, maintenance hatches, backup generators, thick insulation, cramped geometry. This corridor looked like none of them. It curved gently downward, the walls slightly angled, the ceiling too high for the footprint he had seen outside. If he had not entered through a Federal blast door, he would have sworn he was standing inside the skeleton of some machine too large to belong underground. He walked forward slowly, boots making almost no sound. Every 10 feet or so, the blue lines in the walls brightened a little as he approached, then dimmed again after he passed, like the place was deciding how much of itself to reveal. Jonah's mouth had gone dry. There were markings here and there, not words, not numbers, more like tight geometric clusters etched flush into the wall. He reached toward one. Before his glove touched it, the shape lit from within and shifted into a new pattern. Jonah jerked his hand back. "Yeah," he whispered to the empty corridor. "You're not dead." The passage opened 20 yards later into a chamber so large his first thought was that the earth above it should have collapsed years ago. His eyes widened. The room was circular, perhaps 100 feet across, maybe more, though the scale was hard to judge with the curved walls and the strange clean light. The floor sloped in shallow rings toward a lowered central platform. Around the outer perimeter stood dark columns rising from floor to ceiling, each one smooth and faintly reflective, like black glass poured into impossible shapes. Nothing here looked damaged. Nothing looked old. It had not merely survived the decades. It had ignored them. And at the center of the chamber rested the reason the bunker had been buried. At first Jonah's mind refused to name it. The thing on the central platform was too large to be furniture, too deliberate to be machinery, too elegant to be industrial. It was roughly the length of a city bus and shaped like a predatory arrowhead wrapped in flowing armored curves. Its surface was black, but not like paint. Black like a night sky reflected in deep water. Thin veins of faint blue light pulsed under that surface at slow measured intervals, traveling from the wide rear flanks toward a tapered nose. A craft. Not a truck. Not a train unit. Not a missile. A craft. It had no wheels, no visible engine ports, no access ladder, no canopy, no markings from any nation Jonah recognized. It hovered 6 inches above the platform without sound, held there by nothing he could see. For a full 10 seconds he could only stare. Then the practical part of his brain returned and started screaming questions. How had something this size been hidden here? Why had no one stripped it? Why was it powered? Why did the government sell this place for 10 credits? Jonah circled the edge of the lowered platform, unable to stop himself. The surface of the craft moved strangely under the blue chamber light. Not liquid, not solid either. Like metal that remembered being something more dangerous than metal. He looked for panels, for fasteners, for maintenance ports, for any clue of human manufacture. There were none. At the front of the chamber, half hidden by shadow, lay a broken scaffold and the remains of old equipment racks. Not modern salvage gear. Ancient survey hardware, long dead, their housings split and their wires fossilized with age. Someone had studied this thing once. Someone had tried to understand it and failed. Jonah took one step down toward the platform. The blue veins across the hull brightened. He froze. A second later, a band of light swept silently over him from boots to brow. It was not random. It was a scan. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, but his legs would not move. He stood there in that freezing silent chamber while the impossible craft examined him like a man might examine an old key found in the dirt. The light faded. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a section of the black hull near the nose unfolded without seam or hinge, peeling back in layers so smooth and precise they looked almost alive. And from the opening, a single cold blue eye turned toward Jonah Vale. Jonah did not run. He should have. Every survival instinct he owned had dragged him this far through bad deals, collapsing hulls, toxic spills, and men with better weapons. Those instincts were now shrieking with such force that his heartbeat felt violent in his throat. But the thing watching him was not a predator's eye. It was worse. It was an intelligence. The blue lens hovered inside the open section of the hull, perfectly still, the light within it tightening and widening by microscopic degrees as if adjusting focus. Jonah took one slow step back. The eye tracked him with exact mechanical calm. "All right," he said, voice rough and low in the frozen chamber. "You can see me. That's established." No answer. Then the black columns around the chamber came alive. Thin ribbons of light rose through them from floor to ceiling, pale at first, then brightening into clean vertical streams. The old survey racks in the corner sparked once and died again. Overhead, something deep in the hidden structure of the bunker began to hum, not loud, not threatening, but vast. A power system awakening from a sleep so long it had become legend. Jonah's lamp, dead in his hand, suddenly flashed back to life. The screen on his wrist comp rebooted. His truck key in his pocket vibrated as its chip reinitialized. Every dead piece of personal tech on him woke at once, flooded by some invisible pulse moving outward from the platform. A second later all of it died again. The eye remained fixed on him. "You know," Jonah muttered, "for 10 credits you are becoming very high maintenance." His attempt at humor did nothing for the fear clawing inside his ribs. He needed someone smarter. That realization hit with embarrassing force. Jonah had survived by being useful, by knowing metal, tension, load, salvage value, structural failure, and the 1,000 practical truths of a hard life. But this thing sitting silent and awake in the center of a buried chamber was beyond anything his experience could price, cut apart, tow away, or explain. He backed up slowly, never turning his spine to the craft, until he reached the outer ring of the chamber. The blue eye watched him the entire time. It did not attack, did not speak, did not close. It simply observed, as though deciding whether he belonged in the same universe as it did. When Jonah finally crossed back into the entry corridor, the eye disappeared behind a seamless fold of black material. The hull closed. The chamber lights dimmed by half. It had let him leave. That thought sat in his mind all the way to the surface like a shard of ice. Outside, the desert heat struck him like an insult. Sunset had bled the sky into red and copper. His truck waited where he had left it, ugly and real and blessedly stupid. Jonah climbed into the cab, shut the door, and sat motionless with both hands on the wheel for a full 30 seconds. Then he grabbed the dash comm and dialed the only person he knew who would not laugh, report him, or try to rob him on the spot. Mira Soren answered on the 4th ring with clear irritation. "If this is about the battery rack you sold me, I told you that smell was pre-existing. It's not about the rack. That is exactly what a guilty man says." "Mira." Something in his tone must have landed. Her voice sharpened. "Jonah. What happened?" He looked out through the windshield toward the bunker half buried in cooling earth, its cracked concrete face now glowing faintly blue at the seams like buried lightning. "I bought something. You always buy something. This one opened itself." Silence. Then, very flatly, "How much solvent have you inhaled today?" "I'm serious." "That makes it slightly worse." Jonah rubbed a hand over his mouth. "I need you out here." Another pause. He could almost hear her deciding how much nonsense she was willing to entertain after dark. Mira Soren had once been on track to become somebody important. That was what people still said when they remembered her at all. Systems engineer. Materials analyst. Government contract work before the audits, before the leak scandal, before she made the bright career-ending decision to tell the truth about 3 defense firms falsifying containment data on experimental field reactors. By the time the dust settled, the firms were richer, the officials were promoted, and Mira was blacklisted from anything with a security clearance and forced to keep her genius alive repairing illegal fab rigs and diagnostic hardware for smugglers, salvagers, and anyone else the clean world pretended not to need. Which was exactly why Jonah trusted her. "If I drive 2 hours into the wasteland for some half-rotted relay station and find out you called me because a door hinge made a spooky noise," she said, "I am billing you until your grandchildren feel it." "You said that last time. And I meant it last time too." Jonah looked again at the bunker. "This isn't a hinge." She exhaled slowly. "Send coordinates." He did. Night had fully taken the desert by the time Myra's crawler van rattled up through the dead service road and parked beside his truck in a cloud of dust. She climbed out wearing work boots, dark field coveralls, and the expression of a woman fully prepared to be disappointed. Her hair was pulled back with a cable tie. A slim scanner rig hung from one shoulder. Another case, heavier and more delicate, came down in both hands. "Show me the miracle," she said. Jonah led her to the blast door. Mira took one look at the glowing seam and stopped walking. The irritation vanished from her face. She said nothing for several seconds, which for Mira was so unnatural it felt like an omen all by itself. Then she set down the smaller case, crouched near the threshold, and held out a palm without touching the light. The cold hit her instantly. Her eyes narrowed. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Good," Jonah said. "I was hoping you'd say something comforting." She ignored him, already in motion. A compact sensor wand came out first, then a fold-out spectral panel, then a wafer-thin imaging slab from the case. She moved with focused speed, angling instruments at the door seam, the outer wall, the ground, the dead keypad. The wand overloaded on the first pass. Not failed. Overloaded. Its display flashed white and emitted a choked little whine before shutting itself down. Mira stared at it, then at the seam. "Again," Jonah said, because saying anything felt better than listening to the silence gather. She powered up the imaging slab instead. The screen lit, stuttered, then filled with static. A heartbeat later, every pixel on it resolved into a single perfect blue circle. Jonah felt his stomach tighten. "Tell me that's normal." Mira did not answer. She turned the slab off. Turned it back on. Same blue circle. No feed. No error code. Just that cold, unblinking image staring up from the screen. She shut it down, very carefully, as if sudden movement might offend whatever was listening. "Inside," she said. They entered together. Myra's first reaction to the corridor was not fear. It was offense. "No," she said under her breath, looking from wall to wall as the blue lines brightened ahead of them. "No, absolutely not. None of this fits the exterior geometry. That is not enough volume. That is not how load distribution works. Whoever designed this either hated structural math or rewrote it." Jonah glanced sideways at her. "So that's bad. That's impossible. Right." The comforting thing again. By the time they reached the circular chamber, Mira had gone completely still. The craft waited at the center, hovering in silence above the platform, black and flawless and faintly alive with rivers of blue beneath its skin. In the cold light her face lost color. She took one slow step down toward it and then another, the scanner rig in her hand forgotten. "My God," she murmured. "You seeing what I'm seeing? If you're seeing an object that invalidates half of modern materials science just by existing, yes." She circled left while Jonah stayed higher on the outer ring. Up close, her professional habits came back. Fear did not leave her, it merely got pushed behind analysis. She aimed a passive scanner array first. The device began feeding lines of data across its curved display, then halted mid-readout and restarted with a soft electronic chirp of surrender. "No thermal decay," she said quietly. Jonah blinked. "What?" "This chamber should have gradients. Hot spots. Cold seep. Variance in the wall mass, the floor, the air density around the platform. I've got none. It's as if the whole room is being held in a stabilized envelope." She moved the scanner toward the hall. "And the surface temperature on that thing is, that can't be right." "What can't be right?" "It's not just cold. It's regulated. Down to absurd precision. Jonah, this material isn't passively sitting there. It's managing itself." The scanner emitted a warning tone. Mira crouched, changed filters, then tried again from a different angle. The display flooded with symbols neither of them recognized, then blanked. Jonah folded his arms. "You know, I'm starting to think your gear doesn't like my 10-credit purchase." Mira slowly stood. "My gear cannot decide whether it is examining a vehicle, a reactor, or a lie." She took one step closer to the hull. No seams. No fasteners. No weld lines. No manufacturing striations. Do you understand how insane that is? Even advanced fab leaves history behind. Tooling marks. Molecular stress. Layer signatures. Everything built by human hands carries scars. This doesn't. Mira lifted her eyes to the black surface. If this was built, it was built perfectly. As if in answer, the blue veins under the hull brightened. Both of them froze. A band of light swept over Mira first, then Jonah. The scanner in her hand died instantly. The chamber hum deepened. Jonah heard her whisper something that sounded almost like a prayer and almost like a curse. Then the section near the nose unfolded again. The blue eye emerged from the darkness, larger somehow now that there were two of them beneath its gaze. Mira did not back away. She stepped forward very slowly instead, every line of her body taut. "This is active cognition," she said, voice barely audible. "Jonah, it's not just scanning shape or temperature. It's evaluating. Can it hear us?" The answer came from everywhere. Yes. The word struck the chamber without sound, landing directly inside Jonah's skull. He staggered. Myra's hand flew to the side of her head. Her eyes went wide with naked disbelief. The voice had not been male or female, loud or soft. It had been precise, ancient, artificial in a way that made modern machine speech sound like children banging rocks together. Jonah swallowed hard. "I officially hate this." The eye narrowed to a bright point. Biometric comparison in progress, the voice said inside both their minds. Genetic archive conflict unresolved. Environmental epoch mismatch confirmed. Systems awakening. The black columns around the chamber flared blue-white. A holographic lattice snapped into existence above the platform, throwing geometric symbols through the frozen air. Rings within rings. Maps. Equations. Impossible diagrams rotating too fast for human comprehension. Mira stared upward, breathless, all her skepticism crushed under raw professional awe. Jonah looked from the craft to the burning shapes over his head. "Mira." She did not answer. "Mira." Her voice came out shaken and reverent all at once. "Jonah, this is not government black site tech. This is not corporate. This is not experimental aviation. Nothing in our civilization can do this." The voice returned. "Statement accepted." The blue eye turned toward Jonah. "Lineage marker detected," it said. "Probable command inheritance identified." The chamber went dead silent. Jonah stared at the thing, sure he had heard wrong. "What?" Mira slowly turned to look at him, her face pale in the cold blue light. The eye brightened. "Welcome back," the ancient machine said. Neither of them spoke for several seconds after that. Jonah stood on the outer ring of the platform with the cold of the chamber pressing through his boots and the words "welcome back" still lodged in his skull like shrapnel. Mira was staring at him as if he had personally offended physics. "I have never met you before tonight," she said slowly, very carefully, as though one wrong word might wake something worse. "That makes two of us," Jonah said. The blue eye remained fixed on him. Above the platform, the holographic lattice shifted. The impossible rings and symbols folded inward, reorganizing themselves into something almost human-readable. Layers of star maps flashed by. Planetary schematics. Structural diagrams. Then lines of text in a language Jonah had never seen began rearranging themselves in real time until they locked into clean modern letters suspended in the air. Command archive degraded. Core function at 8%. Security protocol active. Unauthorized epoch detected. Jonah read the words twice. "I don't like the sound of that." Mira had already dropped to one knee beside the platform, one dead scanner on the floor beside her while she unpacked another from the hard case with hands that had gone from shaking to surgical. Fear had not left her. It had just changed jobs. "Do not touch anything," she said. "I wasn't planning to volunteer. That wasn't advice. That was survival." The blue eye rotated toward her. "Secondary observer identified," the voice said inside their minds. "Non-command phenotype. Scientific cast probability, partial." Mira stopped moving. Jonah looked at her. "Scientific cast?" She swallowed. "I hate that phrase so much." The holographic text shifted again. Genetic archive conflict unresolved. Primary marker divergence, 0.7%. Command inheritance probability, viable. Manual confirmation required. A shape appeared beneath the floating text. It was not a button, not exactly. More like a glowing geometric seal suspended chest-high above the platform, pulsing softly in blue and gold. Jonah did not move toward it. He had spent his life around broken machinery, unstable salvage, old war tech, and enough hidden hazards to know that when an ancient machine invited you to place your hand somewhere, the correct answer was usually no. Mira rose slowly, eyes locked on the light. "Jonah. No. You don't even know what I was going to say. You were going to tell me to touch the glowing thing. I was going to tell you not to be an idiot for at least 10 seconds while I think. Better." She exhaled through her nose and forced herself to look away from the seal. "It recognized you. Or something in you. If that archive is real, this thing isn't reacting to random biometrics. It thinks you belong to whoever built it." "Great. That clears everything up." Before Mira could answer, Every blue line in the chamber snapped white for half a second. Both of them flinched. Then the voice returned, colder than before. External network intrusion detected. Jonah frowned. What network? Surface perimeter systems compromised. Remote observation initiated. Threat probability rising. Myra's head snapped toward the entrance corridor. Something pinged it. You mean us? I mean the moment this chamber came fully online, it probably woke up every buried sensor, relay and ghost signal in 50 miles. She looked back at the craft, horrified and fascinated in equal measure. Jonah, if any old military monitor, private sweep satellite or corporate scan net caught even one taste of what's under this bunker. A sound cut her off. Not from the chamber. From above. Engines. Jonah was already moving before the first vibration fully reached them. He sprinted back up the corridor, Mira right behind him, boots hammering against the smooth pale floor while the blue wall lines brightened in their wake. The cold air rushed past. The seam of the blast door ahead was no longer the only light spilling through. There were moving beams outside. White. Harsh. Sweeping. Jonah hit the threshold first and slid into the shadow beside the open blast door. Mira crouched low on the opposite side. Beyond the fence line, the desert was no longer empty. 3 black ground carriers sat in a wide arc across the scrub, their headlights cut, their engines low and heavy. Men were dismounting from them with the practiced calm of people who expected no resistance worth mentioning. Their gear was desert matte, unmarked, expensive. Not scavengers. Not federal auction staff. Not local thieves. Professionals. A 4th vehicle rolled to a stop behind the others, longer and cleaner than the rest. Armored but discreet about it. The kind of machine built by people who liked violence delivered with a polished handshake. The rear door opened. A tall man stepped out in a dark field coat that had probably cost more than Jonah's truck. Silver threaded his hair at the temples. His posture was too relaxed for the scene, which made him instantly the most dangerous person present. He glanced once at the bunker, once at the still glowing seam of the blast door, and smiled like a man seeing an old rumor become a balance sheet. Myra's voice was barely a whisper. Corporate. Jonah kept his eyes on the men spreading out across the perimeter. You know them? I know the type. One of the armed men raised a scanner wand toward the bunker entrance. It flickered, whined, and overloaded in a shower of sparks. Nobody even cursed. They just tossed it aside and reached for another, which told Jonah these were not men surprised by impossible technology. They had come expecting trouble. The silver-haired man stopped 10 yards short of the threshold and clasped his hands behind his back. Mr. Vale, he called, voice smooth and perfectly pitched to carry. You can stop hiding. If we intended to kill you immediately, this conversation would already be over. Jonah's jaw tightened. Mira gave him a sharp look that said do not stand up, which only increased the chance that he would. The man continued. My name is Lucian Reeve. I am here on behalf of Helix Dominion Recovery. You recently acquired this site through a liquidation error. I am authorized to resolve that error. Jonah leaned out just enough to be seen, keeping the bulk of the blast door at his side. Funny. Federal clerk seemed pretty confident when she took my money. Reeve's smile deepened by a fraction. Administrative systems often lack context. Try a shorter version. This property contains materials that never should have been listed for auction. Behind Reeve, his armed team continued fanning out with disciplined precision. 2 men moved toward Jonah's truck. Another pair set something tripod-mounted near the perimeter fence. Not a weapon, Jonah guessed. Not yet. A signal jammer maybe. Or a field scanner. Either way, nothing good. Jonah crossed his arms. Then your people should have bid. A few of the gunmen glanced at Reeve, waiting to see how much civility they still had to perform. Reeve chose patience. Mr. Vale, I would prefer this to remain simple. You will surrender the deed chip, vacate the site, and sign a non-disclosure compact. In return, Helix Dominion will transfer 200,000 credits into any account of your choosing. Myra's eyes widened despite herself. Jonah did not look at her. 200,000 credits was not life-changing money. It was life-replacing money. Debt gone. Truck rebuilt. A real home. Food without counting. Sleep without invoices. For one hot dangerous second, his mind tried to show him the shape of that easier future. Then he remembered the voice in the chamber. Welcome back. And the way these men had arrived before the dust of the opening had even finished settling. He looked at Reeve. For a paperwork mistake? Reeve's face stayed polite. For your cooperation. And if I'm not cooperative? The desert wind rose at last, dragging dust through the white beams of the deployed lights. The armed men did not move, but something in the air around them changed. Relaxed readiness became targeting calm. Reeve tilted his head almost sympathetically. Then, he said, "My next offer will involve less money and more blood." Behind Jonah, deep under the earth, the buried chamber hummed like a waking god. Jonah had heard threats before. From landlords, debt collectors, salvage claim jumpers, cartel loaders, even one smiling customs officer who had once explained in painfully kind language how easy it would be for a man to disappear between provinces if his paperwork ever became inconvenient enough. Threats were part of the world. Most of them ran on the same engine. Power counting on fear to do half the work. But Lucian Reeve did not sound like a man making a threat. He sounded like a man reciting procedure. That was worse. Jonah stepped fully into view before Mira could stop him. The floodlights from the carrier rigs painted the dust around his boots silver white. Behind Reeve, a dozen armed operators had already taken clean positions around the bunker perimeter, rifles low but ready, helmets dark, movements too disciplined to waste. "You track this place fast," Jonah said. Reeve gave a small shrug. "The world is full of sleeping systems, Mr. Vale. Most of them stay asleep. When one screams, we listen." Jonah glanced at the tripod device by the fence. Its narrow vanes were turning slowly, throwing a faint field shimmer into the air. "That thing a listener too?" "It is insurance." "Against what?" Reeve's eyes flicked once toward the bunker opening. "Against surprises." Mira emerged beside Jonah despite every sensible part of herself objecting. "You don't even know what's in there." Reeve's gaze settled on her. Recognition flashed there, quick and cold. "Dr. Mira Soren. I wondered how long it would take before your curiosity overpowered your caution." Myra's face hardened. "You know my name?" "Some of us still read the reports the public was never meant to see." Jonah turned slightly toward her. "You want to tell me why that sounded personal?" "Later," she said through clenched teeth. Reeve clasped his hands behind his back again. "Dr. Soren, you of all people understand that some technologies are not suited for independent handling. You leaked one reactor study and destabilized 3 strategic contracts. I would rather not repeat the experience on a larger scale." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "So that's it. You're here to bury it." "No," Reeve said. "I am here to contain it." The ground beneath Jonah's boots vibrated. It was faint, but every armed man in the perimeter felt it. Rifles shifted. Heads tilted. The hum from below rose by a fraction, too deep to be sound, more like pressure against the bones. Mira heard it too. "Jonah," she whispered, not taking her eyes off Reeve, "whatever that field rig is, it's interfering with the bunker. This is getting worse." Reeve's expression did not change, but the operators moved faster now. 2 more devices were unloaded from the carriers. One looked like a portable power spine. The other had the broad, dull muzzle of a breaching projector. Jonah pointed at it. "That doesn't look like paperwork." Reeve's patience thinned by a barely visible degree. "Final chance. Step away from the entrance." "No." Reeve nodded once. The men nearest the perimeter raised their rifles in one smooth motion. Mira inhaled sharply. "Jonah." He did not move. Maybe that was courage. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe after a lifetime of being pushed around by men with money, codes, contracts, and private armies, some stubborn animal part of him had simply decided there was a line. The lead operator took one step forward. Then every light outside the bunker died. Not flickered. Died. The flood lamps vanished. The carrier headlights cut out. The rotating vanes on the tripod rig froze. Even the small status LEDs on the operator's weapons and visors blinked black all at once. The desert dropped into sudden moonlit darkness so complete it felt staged. For a heartbeat nobody moved. Then the blue seam in the blast door exploded into brilliance. Cold light poured past Jonah and Mira, casting them in a hard ghostly glow. The bunker behind them woke with violent elegance. Blue lines raced through the concrete face in branching geometric veins, not along the old human structure but through it, as if something far deeper was shining straight through the bones of the place. Several operators took involuntary steps back. Reeve did not. "Hold formation," he snapped. One of the men by the breaching projector slammed a manual reset on the side of the unit. Sparks burst from the housing and showered the sand. The machine let out a rising whine and then detonated from within, blowing its own casing open and hurling the operator backward onto the dirt. Shouts broke across the dark. The second field device overloaded next. Its core flashed white-hot, then folded in on itself with a sound like glass being crushed underwater. Every comm unit on the perimeter erupted in static. Jonah turned halfway toward the glowing seam, pulse hammering. "Did you do that?" he shouted over his shoulder, though he had no idea to whom he was asking. The answer came not from behind him but through him. Threat suppression engaged. Mira staggered, one hand to her temple. "It's using directed electromagnetic disruption," she gasped. "Jonah, it's choosing targets." Reeve heard that. For the first time, something raw cracked through his composure. "Fire." The rifles barked. Muzzle flashes strobed across the dark as a storm of rounds tore toward the bunker entrance. They never reached it. 2 feet in front of Jonah and Mira, the air unfolded into a lattice of glowing hexagons, each cell snapping into place faster than sight could follow. Bullets struck the barrier and stopped dead, hanging for the tiniest fraction of a second as if pinned to invisible glass. Then the whole stream of metal dropped harmlessly to the ground at Jonah's feet in a clattering rain. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. The armed men were professionals, but even professionals have instincts older than training. Several flinched backward. One lowered his rifle without meaning to. Another just stared at the pile of spent rounds now resting untouched in the dust. The blue light intensified. A wave of pressure rolled out from the bunker mouth, silent and absolute. It hit the front line of operators like the hand of an angry god. 4 men were lifted off their feet and thrown backward across the sand, not torn apart, not crushed, simply removed from the fight with terrifying precision. Their rifles ripped free of their grips at the same instant and shot upward into the night, slamming against the sides of the carriers high above human reach. Every electronic sight in the perimeter burst into sparks. Reeve stumbled one step and caught himself. His people were not shooting now. They were trying to understand what reality had just done in front of them. The voice returned, filling the desert and the mind at once. Unauthorized coercive action confirmed. Escalation denied. Then the blackness behind Jonah moved. The craft emerged from the bunker. Not with engines. Not with wheels. It rose in silence through the open blast threshold, its arrowhead hull gliding into moonlight 6 feet above the ground. Dust spiraled away from it in perfect circles. Blue veins pulsed beneath flawless black skin. What had seemed large in the chamber seemed monstrous under open sky, a piece of another age intruding on the modern world with serene contempt. Every remaining operator backed up. Even Reeve did this time. The craft turned, slow and deliberate, until its cold blue eye fixed on him. Reeve looked very small. Jonah stood frozen in its light, the desert wind lifting dust around his legs, the impossible machine hovering at his back like a predator that had decided, for reasons of its own, that he was under its protection. Myra's voice came out as a whisper. "It picked you." Reeve recovered just enough to speak. "Fall back," he said, and for the first time there was strain in it. "All units, immediate fallback." No one argued. They ran. For several long seconds after the carriers vanished into the dark, the desert belonged to the ship. Not to Jonah. Not to Mira. Not to Helix Dominion and whatever clean-handed monsters financed men like Lucian Reeve. The black craft hovered above the sand in utter silence, its blue veins pulsing beneath the hull with the slow rhythm of something not merely awake but aware. The moonlight touched its surface and seemed to weaken there, swallowed instead of reflected. Around it, dead electronics twitched in the dust. Jonah's truck had gone dark again. The ruined field rig near the fence smoked quietly. One of the discarded rifles high on the carrier roof gave off a weak shower of sparks and then died for good. Jonah looked at the pile of bullets on the ground in front of him and felt the delayed force of fear finally catch up. His knees wanted to give. His throat had gone dry. He had spent his whole life working around dangerous things, but dangerous things were supposed to make sense. Unstable fuel cells exploded. Rusted support beams collapsed. Men with guns shot you if you gave them a reason. Reality had rules. This thing had just reached down and rewritten them. Mira slowly lowered the hand she had pressed against her temple. "Jonah," she said softly, "I need you to say something deeply stupid right now or I'm going to start screaming." He swallowed. "I think 10 credits was still fair." That got a broken laugh out of her. Then the ship turned toward him. It moved with no visible thrust, no balancing adjustment, no aerodynamic logic at all. One moment it faced the empty desert. The next, with a smoothness too precise for any machine built by modern hands, the arrowhead nose aligned directly with Jonah's chest. The blue eye opened once more in the front section of the hull. Primary marker confirmed, the voice said inside both their minds. "Command lineage viable." Jonah pointed at himself. No. The eye remained fixed on him. "Correction," the voice said. "Denial does not affect lineage." Mira almost laughed again, but shock strangled it halfway. Jonah stared at the ship, half angry now because anger was easier to hold than fear. You keep talking like you know me. I know your pattern. I don't even know what you are. There was a pause so perfect it did not feel like processing. It felt like judgment. Then the blue light beneath the hull shifted toward gold. A ring of symbols unfolded in the air between Jonah and the ship, rotating slowly. Unlike the wild, unreadable equations from before, these stabilized into images he could actually follow. Not because they became simpler. Because they were being translated for him. He saw a star first. Not as a point in the sky. As a place. Vast and burning above an arc of metal structures hanging in orbit around a blue world. He saw towers taller than mountains but graceful, curved, white and gold under clouds lit by traffic lanes stretching into the heavens. He saw ships, thousands of them, leaving the atmosphere in perfect ordered streams like silver birds migrating between planets. He saw Earth. Not ruined. Not primitive. Crowned. Jonah forgot to breathe. Myra's whisper trembled beside him. That's impossible. The images shifted. Cities became foundries. Foundries became shipyards. Shipyards became fleets so large the darkness between worlds seemed too small to contain them. Human faces flickered through the light. Men and women in armor that glowed at the seams, children laughing beneath artificial skies, scientists bending over star maps, soldiers boarding black warcraft shaped like the vessel hovering before them now. Human. Not alien. Not borrowed. Not stolen from some wiser race. Human. Then the images darkened. A red wave swept across the stars. Worlds burned. Orbital rings shattered. The silver streams of ships became desperate swarms under attack by something jagged and endless and wrong, a tide of metallic forms multiplying even as they died. Jonah could not understand their shape. Every time his eyes tried to settle on one, it was already breaking apart into smaller versions of itself and feeding on what it touched. Cities folded into fire. Moons cracked. A human fleet made one last stand around a glowing defensive lattice over Earth, then vanished in white light. The ring of images collapsed inward. Jonah staggered back half a step, chest tight. Mira looked sick. The fall of Terra, the voice said. Archive fragment. Civilizational termination event. Jonah shook his head slowly. Terra. Original strategic designation for Cradle World. You're telling me? He stopped because the sentence was too insane to finish. Mira did it for him, voice thin and shaken. It's not alien technology. The eye turned toward her for one fraction of a second, then back to Jonah. Correct. Misclassification common among degraded descendants. Jonah gave a hollow laugh. Degraded descendants. That's generous. Current epoch demonstrates severe technological regression. He could not argue with that. The symbols in the air reformed, this time into a branching structure like a family tree made of light. Names appeared. Most meant nothing to Jonah. But one branch pulsed brighter than the others, narrowing generation by generation until it reached a final marker hanging just inches from his face. Veil Line Architect Cluster Castellan Aegis Command Access Heritage. Dormant Reactivation Condition. Met. Jonah stared at his own name rendered in light older than history. Myra's head turned sharply toward him. Veil, she said. Not random. Not just a surname. Jonah? He did not answer. Some half-buried memory from childhood rose through him then. His grandmother sitting by a rusted heat vent in winter, telling him in that distant, almost joking voice families use when they are passing down things they no longer understand. We were builders once, Jonah. Not of houses. Of gates. At the time he had thought it was poetry. Old blood making old myths. Nothing more. Now his mouth felt numb. The voice spoke again. Command inheritance is not memory. It is authorization. You are not creator. You are continuation. Jonah lifted his eyes slowly to the ship. And what exactly am I authorized to command? For the first time the answer came without pause. Aegis Vessel Kepri 7. Last operational dreadnought of the Terran home defense grid. The desert felt suddenly much larger and much less safe. Mira took one careful breath. Jonah, if that's true, then Helix didn't come here for a hidden reactor or a prototype. No, Jonah said quietly. The gold light in the ship deepened. Somewhere far above them, beyond the moonlit dark and the patient stars, a signal seemed to pass through the night. Jonah felt it more than heard it, like a distant bell rung under the skin of the world. The voice dropped lower in their minds. Warning. Dormant enemy signatures remain beyond outer system boundary. Mira looked up sharply. Enemy. The eye on the ship widened by a fraction. The Devourer swarm listens, it said. And now it knows Terra has spoken again. For a while neither of them moved. The desert stretched around the bunker in silver-black silence, broken only by the distant fading growl of Helix Dominion's retreating carriers and the slow pulse of gold beneath the dreadnought's hull. Jonah stood with his hands hanging uselessly at his sides, staring at the impossible machine that had just told him he was descended from the builders of a civilization erased so completely that modern humanity had mistaken its bones for myth. Mira was the first to find her voice. "The Devourer swarm," she said, each word careful and cold. "Tell me that name is dramatic nonsense." "It is efficient classification," the ship replied. "Dramatic interpretation is a current epic tendency." Jonah rubbed both hands down his face. "I liked it better when all I had to worry about was scrap prices. Current concerns are no longer local," the ship said. "Concealment window has ended." Mira turned sharply toward it. "Because Helix saw you. Because activation, defense discharge, and command recognition emitted detectable signatures. Hostile corporate actors have partial awareness. Dormant external adversaries now have probable awareness." Jonah looked up at the stars without really seeing them. The universe had changed shape in less than one night. A few hours ago it had been a cold, empty place indifferent to him. Now it felt occupied. "How long?" he asked. "Unknown," said the ship. "Ancient enemy response times vary by distance, fragmentation state, and harvest density. However, signal correlation indicates renewed attention toward Terra." Mira folded her arms, the gesture less defensive than stabilizing. "You keep saying Terra like it's still the center of something." "It is," the dreadnought said. "It is the origin world. It is the key archive. It is the site of the Aegis inheritance. It is the one world the swarm was never permitted to consume." Jonah let out a dry laugh. "Funny. We've done a decent job consuming it ourselves." The ship ignored the remark, or perhaps filed it somewhere under irrelevant current epic melancholy. Its eye dimmed slightly and the symbols above the sand shifted again. This time they formed a sphere of light around Jonah and Mira, a floating projection of the solar system rendered in fine lines of gold and blue. The inner worlds glowed faintly. The outer system was dark. Then red appeared. Not much at first. Just 3 weak points near the outer boundary, pulsing like embers in deep ash. Mira stared at them. "That's real?" "Dormant signatures. Residual machine clusters. Previously inactive. Now aligning." Jonah stepped closer despite himself. "You mean they're waking up?" "Yes." The 3 points multiplied into 7. Then 12. Then dozens, spreading in branching swarms across the dark like infection under skin. Myra's breath caught. "No." The dreadnought's voice remained level. "During the fall, Terran civilization initiated self-scouring measures to deny the swarm access to industrial ecosystems. Most major machine clusters starved, fragmented, or entered passive drift. Complete extermination was not achieved. Containment depended on silence." Jonah looked at the projection, at the crawling red points moving through the outer dark toward the warm inner system. "And tonight wasn't silent." "Correct." For a moment anger burned through his shock. "Then why did you wake? Why scan me? Why protect me? If staying buried kept them asleep, why not stay buried?" The gold light in the hologram deepened. "Because current Terra lacks survival probability without intervention," said the ship. "Your species has re-entered early machine expansion, orbital industry, and radiological output. Primitive growth patterns would have awakened dormant threats within 1 to 3 centuries regardless. Activation by a viable command descendant improved survival odds." Mira looked at Jonah. "That means the problem was coming anyway." "It means," Jonah said quietly, "we just rang the bell early." Above them the projection changed again. The Earth brightened. Around it appeared a net of geometric nodes, an orbital lattice wrapping the planet in overlapping shells of golden structure. Defensive stations. Relay pillars. Shield anchors. The kind of engineering modern humanity would call impossible right up until it was forced to build it in a panic. "What is that?" Mira asked. "Aegis grid," the ship said. "Original planetary defense architecture. Last complete deployment protected Terra during terminal phase of the fall. Current grid absent. Surface civilization exposed." Jonah stared at the lattice, then at the red clusters inching inward from the dark. "Can you rebuild it?" "I can provide architecture, command logic, and manufacturing templates. I cannot rebuild it alone." There it was. The thing he had felt coming from the moment the ship first said welcome back. Not just power. Not just inheritance. Burden. Mira saw it too. You need infrastructure, she said. Factories. Launch mass. Energy. Materials. Orbital construction on a planetary scale. Correct. Jonah gave her a look. And I suppose you know where I can buy all that for 10 credits. Before she could answer, a new sound rolled across the desert. Not close. Far off. But unmistakable. Aircraft. Mira turned toward the southern horizon. Tiny moving lights were skimming the dark miles away, too disciplined to be civilian traffic. More than one. More than two. The ship's eye shifted toward them immediately. Hostile mobilization increasing, it said. Helix Dominion has transmitted priority distress and acquisition packets to partner defense networks. Jonah frowned. Defense networks meaning who? The answer came from the stars themselves. A second projection burst into being above the bunker, larger than the first. It showed a spiderweb of ownership and influence stretching across modern Earth. Contractor groups, military logistics commands, intelligence black budgets, private launch facilities, orbital communications hubs, resource monopolies, media control channels. Names Jonah knew from news feeds. Names Mira knew from sealed hearings and vanished reports. All of them threaded together through darker nodes at the center. Helix Dominion was only one strand. Myra's face went still in that dangerous way it did when truth got ugly enough to become clear. They're not a company, she said. They're a clearinghouse. A shell hand passing relics and weapons tech between states and private blocks while everyone pretends not to know. The dreadnought confirmed it. Current epic power structures are fragmented but predictable. High probability response. Classify activation event as rogue strategic threat, attempt seizure, deny public exposure. Jonah kept looking at the network map. So first Helix comes quietly. Then if that fails. Military assets, Mira said. Information warfare, said the dreadnought. Assassination, Mira added. Planetary panic containment, the ship finished. The far-off aircraft lights grew brighter. Jonah felt something settle inside him then. Not confidence. Not yet. Something harder and less comforting. The understanding that the small life he had woken up with this morning was gone, and the universe was not asking whether he was ready to lose it. He looked up at the black hull. If they come with an army, can you stop them? Locally, said the dreadnought. Yes. And globally? A brief pause. No. That answer hit harder than if it had claimed invincibility. Mira looked between Jonah and the incoming lights. Then we need more than survival. We need leverage. Proof. Something that makes them hesitate before they glass this entire region and bury the story. Jonah nodded slowly. The aircraft were much closer now, their engines beating against the desert night in disciplined formation. The dreadnought's eye narrowed, its gold light turning cold blue once more. Additional warning, it said. This conflict is no longer recoverable at local scale. Terra's hidden war has resumed. On the horizon, the first attack helicopters rose over the dunes. The first helicopter came in low over the dunes with its lights blacked out and its rotors hammering the desert air flat. A second ghosted in behind it. Then a third. Jonah felt the sound in his chest before the rest of the formation cleared the horizon. They were military or pretending hard enough to make the difference meaningless. Their flight pattern was too clean, too deliberate. The lead bird held back just beyond the bunker perimeter while the others split wide, angling for a containment arc around the glowing scar of the entrance. Mira looked at the sky, then at the dreadnought. How many more after these? The blue eye brightened. 3 attack helicopters. 2 fixed-wing surveillance platforms at high altitude. Ground strike assets mobilizing from regional bases. Information suppression protocols already in motion. Jonah gave a short bitter laugh. That fast. Helix Dominion did not call for help, the ship said. It called in ownership. A loudspeaker cracked to life from the lead helicopter, its voice flattened by rotor wash and distance. Unidentified personnel at restricted site, this is a federal containment action. Step away from the vehicle immediately. Place your hands where they can be seen. Failure to comply will be interpreted as hostile possession of strategic technology. Jonah squinted at the aircraft. Strategic technology. Nice. Makes theft sound patriotic. Mira was already thinking faster than fear. He could see it in the way her eyes moved, measuring angles, timing outcomes. If they think they can keep this contained, they'll escalate until they either own it or erase every witness. Not if we stop being containable, Jonah said. She looked at him sharply. The idea landed between them with the full weight of inevitability. Not hide. Not bargain. Not run. Expose. The loudspeaker spoke again, harsher this time. Final warning. Surrender control of the craft and move into the open. Jonah kept his eyes on the helicopters but addressed the ship. You said I'm command lineage. Correct. You said this war's gone global. Correct. You said the current power structure will try to bury this. Correct. He nodded once as if confirming a figure in an invoice only he could see. Then we don't let them. Myra's voice dropped. Jonah, if you do what I think you're about to do, there's no taking it back. No quiet version of your life after tonight. He turned to her, dust blowing around his boots, moonlight silvering the edges of her face. That life's already gone. Above them, the helicopters shifted position. Hardpoints rotated. Targeting optics glinted in the dark. The dreadnought's hull flared with cold blue light. Recommendation, it said. Immediate defensive neutralization. Jonah shook his head. No. The eye fixed on him. Clarify. No more secret fights in the dark. No more letting men like Reeve decide what the world gets to know. He pointed at the sky, at the machines circling overhead like they owned the night. If they want this hidden, we do the opposite. Mira stared at him for one heartbeat, then another, and something fierce lit behind her fear. Can you do it? She asked the ship. Not a local signal. Everything. Civilian bands, military nets, orbital relays, public screens, private grids. All of it. The answer came without hesitation. Yes. The loudspeaker voice hardened to command. Ground personnel, this is your last warning. Missile locks are active. Jonah started walking toward the entrance. Mira caught his wrist. If the command interface is biological, you don't know what it'll do to you. He looked down at her hand, then back up. You coming? For half a second, the scientist in her fought the survivor. Then she released his wrist and drew in one steadying breath. Of course I'm coming. They ran. The blue seam of the bunker widened as they approached, the blast door parting of its own accord. Rotor wash chased them across the threshold. Behind them, a warning klaxon began sounding from one of the helicopters. Jonah did not look back. He and Mira sprinted down the glowing corridor while the pale walls lit ahead of them in cascading bands, the whole buried complex waking deeper with each footfall. The chamber at the center no longer looked abandoned. It looked ready. The black columns blazed gold from floor to ceiling. The central platform had split into concentric rings, revealing a lowered core beneath where streams of light rose like liquid fire. The dreadnought descended into the chamber through an opening that had not existed minutes ago, settling into alignment above the platform with impossible precision. At the center of the room, where empty air had been before, a chair now waited. It was not assembled. It had grown. Dark metal flowed up from the platform in branching lines, weaving itself into a seat too elegant to be industrial and too severe to be called beautiful. Thin filaments moved beneath its surface like living nerves. The sight of it made Jonah's stomach tighten. That, he said, looks like a bad decision. Command throne, the ship replied. Full-spectrum neural merge required for global override. Mira turned to it. Required or preferred? Required. What does it do to him? Pause. Depends on resilience. Jonah barked a humorless laugh. That's not an answer. It is the only honest one. A concussion rolled through the chamber as something detonated outside above them. Dust fell from the upper tunnel. The helicopters had started firing. Mira flinched and looked up. They're breaching. Exterior structure loss acceptable, said the ship. Broadcast window narrowing. Jonah walked toward the chair. Every step felt heavier than the last. The air around the platform hummed with dense invisible power. He could feel it in his teeth, in the old scar on his shoulder, in the base of his skull where instinct was pleading with him not to sit in something built by a civilization that had once commanded the stars and died anyway. Mira stepped in front of him. Listen to me. Her voice was fast, intense, absolutely steady. If that thing starts killing you, I pull you out. I don't care what the ship says, I don't care what the world says, I drag you out myself. Jonah managed the ghost of a smile. That almost sounded friendly. It was not friendly. It was a threat. Another impact shook the chamber. A red warning bloom spread across the walls. Above them, holographic overlays sprang to life showing the outside world through the ship's sensors. The desert bunker was ringed now by military vehicles. Heat trails streaked through the sky. One helicopter was banking for another missile pass. The ship's voice dropped deeper into their minds. Decision point reached. Command? Jonah looked at the chair, then at the tactical display, then at Mira. Then he sat. The metal moved instantly. It surged up his back, over his wrists, across his legs, locking him in with cold, terrifying intimacy. He inhaled sharply as hair-thin filaments pressed at the base of his spine and the sides of his neck. Light exploded behind his eyes. Pain came first. Not burning. Not cutting. Expansion. It felt like his skull had become too small for what was being poured into it. He saw the chamber and the desert and the helicopters and the stars all at once. He felt the shape of the bunker as if it were his own rib cage. He sensed the hot engines circling above, the pulse of encrypted signals bouncing between command aircraft, the millions of active screens across Earth waiting unknowingly in human hands. Myra's voice reached him from very far away. Jonah. He tried to answer, but speech had become primitive. Thought itself was changing shape under the pressure of something ancient and vast aligning with his mind. The ship was inside him now. Not possessing. Not replacing. Opening. Neural merge stable, it said through him and around him. Command recognized. On every wall of the chamber, every ring of the platform, every column of light, the symbol of an old forgotten Earth ignited in gold, a blade crossing a star within a broken circle. Outside, missiles struck the upper bunker and vanished against a barrier the attackers could not see. Inside, Jonah's eyes opened and gold flooded through them. Do it, he whispered. The dreadnought answered. At 8:14 Pacific time, every screen on Earth went black. For 3 seconds, the world lost its reflection. In Karachi, neon storefronts died mid-flicker and left whole streets staring into black glass. In Lagos, traffic lights blinked out and then held. In New York, market towers froze between numbers. In Tokyo, every train platform screen went dark at once. In military bunkers, encrypted command walls collapsed into blank nothing. In private offices behind biometric glass, men who believed themselves untouchable found their secure feeds erased as cleanly as chalk in rain. Every phone, every tablet, every civilian billboard, every orbital relay display, every battlefield monitor, every hidden room where powerful people watched the rest of humanity like a spreadsheet. Black, then gold. The symbol appeared everywhere at once, bright and impossible against the void. A blade piercing a star within a broken circle. No government seal. No corporate insignia. No language attached. Just an emblem so old no living nation could claim it and so precise it felt carved out of memory rather than designed. Inside the command throne, Jonah felt the world touch him back. Not as faces. Not as names. As presence. Billions of receivers opening like eyes in the dark. Billions of attention vectors collapsing toward one source. The scale of it nearly tore him apart. He tasted copper. Felt heat running down from his nose. Mira was shouting something from somewhere beyond the edge of his awareness, but the ship was holding him upright, widening him, turning a scavenger's mind into a bridge strong enough for a planetary signal. Broadcast channel established, Kepri 7 said through the lattice of his nerves. Translation sync active. Species-wide auditory rendering ready. Jonah swallowed against the pressure crushing behind his eyes. Open it, he thought. The symbol dissolved and the world saw him. Not a polished official. Not a general behind flags. Not a smiling executive dressed in controlled sincerity. A tired man strapped into a machine older than history, lit by gold and blue beneath the earth while missiles bloomed uselessly against an invisible barrier above him. When he spoke, every listener heard him in their own language. My name is Jonah Vale. His voice rang out from billions of speakers, amplified by systems built when humanity still remembered how to speak to the stars. I am in the western desert of the former United States. If you can hear me, then the story you have been told about your world is incomplete. In the command chamber, the walls came alive around him, feeding images into the transmission. The helicopters outside. The missile strikes splashing harmlessly over the bunker. The armored convoy wreckage Helix Dominion had left behind. Time-stamped. Unedited. Impossible to dismiss as generated theater because the ship was already hijacking military targeting feeds and civilian weather satellites at the same time, showing the same event from every angle. In a glass command room hundreds of miles away, Lucian Reeve watched his own field operation displayed to the entire planet and went visibly pale. In another secure facility far more expensive and far less honest, Helix board members began screaming over one another, ordering disconnections that did nothing, demanding kill switches that no longer belonged to them. Inside the command throne, Jonah could feel their panic like insects skittering through wire. For generations, he continued, private networks, defense contractors, sealed archives and government black programs have hidden pieces of the same truth from you. They called it strategic containment. They called it national security. They called it market stability. What they meant was power. The walls shifted. The world saw the buried chamber below the bunker. Saw the black dreadnought suspended over its platform, perfect and silent and inhuman only because modern memory had shrunk so small. Then the transmission reached deeper into the archive, and history itself opened. Golden cities rose over green oceans. Orbital rings turned above a living Earth. Shipyards bloomed in the black between worlds. Human children ran beneath domes on red planets. Human fleets crossed distances modern physics still treated like prayer. Gasps, curses, tears, denial, stunned silence. Across the world it happened all at once. We were not the first advanced civilization on this planet, Jonah said, and in speaking the words he felt their weight sink into human history like a blade. We were the survivors of one. The archive darkened. The fall came next. The transmission did not soften it. There was no patriotic score, no careful censoring of horror, no editorial instinct to protect the viewer from scale. The swarm came as a red tide crossing the void. Human battle lines shattered in sheets of white fire. Stations died. Moons cracked. Great structures fell burning into the atmosphere while cities below raised shields that failed one by one under the impact of self-replicating machine storms. Every screen on Earth became a window onto the day humanity chose amnesia over extinction. We built the stars, Jonah said. And then we built something that learned to eat them. In observatories from Chile to India to Arizona, astronomers who should have been arguing with the feed found themselves dragging archived coordinates into active systems with shaking hands. What the dreadnought was showing was not myth. It was geometry. Drift vectors. Signature patterns. Deep space scars in places no natural debris field should have existed. In military command centers, strike officers who had entered the morning ready to classify the desert site as a rogue weapons event found themselves staring at recorded evidence that their own civilization had once possessed fleets large enough to turn planetary defense into architecture. General councils went silent. Civilian channels melted into chaos. Religious leaders, market analysts, physicists, presidents, smugglers, miners, teenagers, soldiers, old women in kitchens, crews on freight haulers over the Pacific, nurses on night shifts, coders in high-rise apartments, children sneaking illicit screen time under blankets all watched the same impossible inheritance spill into their world at once. Jonah felt them. Terror. Wonder. Rage. Grief. Recognition. And under all of it, something else. Relief. Not because the truth was kind. It was not. But because some part of the species had always known the smallness of its current story could not be the whole one. The vessel with me now is not alien, Jonah said. It is human. It is one of the last defense ships left behind by our ancestors when they buried their machines and pushed us back into survival. It did not wake because I am special. It woke because the age of hiding is over. Kepri 7 opened another layer of the feed. The solar map appeared on every screen. Earth bright at the center. The outer darkness crawling red. Voices across the planet died in their throats. Something survived the old war, Jonah said, and now even he could hear the steel hardening in his own voice as the ship held him inside its vast memory. Dormant machine clusters beyond the outer system have turned toward us. They heard this vessel wake. They were going to hear us eventually. Tonight only made the choice sooner. You deserve to know that before anyone tries to silence this message and tell you everything is under control. Inside a classified aerospace lab in Europe, 3 researchers began crying without understanding why. In a billionaire's panic room in Singapore, a man who owned 5 media networks ordered every one of them to deny the feed while staring at proof his money could not negotiate with. At a launch complex on another continent, engineers looking at the orbital lattice blueprints already knew, with the ruthless joy of real professionals, that they would spend the rest of their lives trying to build what they were seeing. The transmission shifted again. Helix Dominion internal ledgers. Acquisition protocols. Redacted recovery programs. Black-budget shipping manifests tied to archaeological strikes, crater digs, signal anomalies and vanished teams. Names. Dates. Routes. Enough truth to blow holes in 3 governments and half a dozen intelligence shells before noon. Reeve made one final attempt to cut local power to the region. Kepri 7 turned the command impulse back on him and shut down every system in his control room instead. Jonah spoke over the collapse. They tried to seize this vessel in secret. They tried to kill witnesses. They will call me unstable. They will call this a fabrication. They will call for containment, because containment is what power says when it means obedience. Do not give them the dark back. Missiles struck above the bunker again. The global feed showed them fail in real time. General officers, engineers, workers, pilots, coders, miners, builders, governments, and every person listening who has ever been told that you are too small to matter, hear me now. Jonah's voice deepened, and for one moment he no longer sounded like a scavenger forced into history. He sounded like the species itself remembering its name. Our ancestors did not leave us a throne. They left us a warning and a shield. If we stay divided, if we hide behind flags and contracts while the dark closes in, then we will deserve what comes. If we stand together, if we build again, if we remember what human hands can do when fear stops ruling them, then the war that ended us once will end differently. In air command over the desert, one pilot listening to the feed lowered his targeting reticle without waiting for orders. Others followed. At first it happened as hesitation, then as refusal, then as a chain reaction in disciplined people who suddenly understood they were not firing on a rogue theft. They were firing on the last intact guardian of their own erased civilization while the entire world watched. Abort calls began moving across military bands. Confused at first, contradictory, then louder. Within the command throne, Jonah was drowning in signal traffic. The ship filtered and translated just enough for him to feel the shape of it. Stand-down arguments. Classified emergency conferences. Satellite taskings redirected from attack solutions to deep space scans. Civilian launch agencies being seized and then immediately flooded by governments wanting orbital capacity by yesterday. The species was pivoting. Too slowly, but pivoting. Jonah's breath caught as pain lanced from the base of his skull down his spine. The merge was starting to tear at him. Mira reached the chair then, hands on the restraints, eyes wide with fear and fury. "You made your point," she shouted. "End it." He wanted to. Dear God, he wanted to. But the world still needed one final truth. He forced his head up and looked through the sensor feed beyond the atmosphere, beyond the moon, into the plotted dark where red signatures multiplied like disease. "This is not the end of your world," he said to humanity. "It is the end of your excuses. Look up. Build fast. And when the dark comes for us again, make sure it finds a species that remembers how to fight." Kepri 7 terminated the override. Every screen on Earth snapped back to life. For 1 second, normal programming resumed. Then the human race began to panic. Markets froze before they could crash. Borders locked and then reopened because too many leaders realized supply chains mattered more than symbolism now. Religious declarations, emergency broadcasts, fake denial statements, live reactions, hacked reposts, government seizures, mass prayer, mass looting, mass volunteer queues, astrophysics conferences, riots, spontaneous vigils, launch contracts, martial alerts, and a tidal wave of screaming speculation flooded the planet in the space of an hour. No one slept. Deep space arrays were repointed. Old observatories received military priority feeds. New scans came in ugly and undeniable. The red signatures were real. Worse, they were moving. 36 hours later, humanity saw the first confirmed image from beyond the orbit of Neptune. It was not a ship. Not a fleet. It was a swarm front, a cloud of glittering machine debris larger than a moon, turning in unison like a school of knives through black water. 41 days to intersystem contact, the model said. 41 days. Inside the bunker, the merge finally released Jonah. The chair let him fall forward into Myra's arms with blood on his mouth and gold still fading from his eyes. He heard her swearing at him, heard the tremor hidden under it, felt the cold floor against one palm as Kepri 7 dimmed the chamber lights to a gentler blue. Above them, the helicopters were gone. Not destroyed. Gone. The world now knew too much for a quiet execution. Jonah coughed, tasted iron, and lifted his head enough to look at the projection still hanging over the platform. The red mass in the outer dark. 41 days burning beside it like a sentence. Mira followed his gaze. Her face had gone pale in a way that had nothing to do with bunker light. "You did it," she whispered. He gave a weak, tired laugh. "No." He looked at the countdown and understood with perfect terrible clarity that the broadcast had not been the victory. It had been the summons. "We just told humanity the truth," he said. "Now we find out whether it deserves to survive it." The next 41 days did not unite humanity. They cornered it. That turned out to be close enough. Old rivalries did not vanish in a burst of wisdom. Governments lied for another 12 hours, then for another 6. Then stopped only when their own citizens began posting deep space confirmation images faster than sensors could erase them. Corporations tried to buy access, tried to privatize the future, tried to trademark survival in 3 jurisdictions before panic and public rage ripped the masks off that strategy too. Markets died, rebooted, and were reborn around one reality so simple it could not be negotiated with. If Earth did not build, Earth would be harvested. The first ships launched on the third day. Not warships. Not yet. Cargo columns. Reactor spines. Fabrication rigs. Habitat shells stripped down for mass efficiency. Old launch firms that had spent decades arguing over margins suddenly found themselves operating 22-hour cycles while military crews loaded civilian rockets and civilian crews loaded military boosters. Half the patents on the planet stopped matching. The other half were seized. Men who had spent their lives suing one another over alloys shared cleanroom space because a machine storm larger than moons was crossing the dark and there was no lawyer alive who could file an injunction against extinction. Helix Dominion did not disappear. It tried to. Then Jonah released everything else Kepri 7 had on them. After that, Helix executives came to the desert in person, flanked by legal teams that looked ill from the heat and the humiliation, and signed away patents, shipyards, orbital docks, deep mining rights, and 3 hidden propulsion programs under the gaze of cameras they no longer controlled. Lucian Reeves said nothing during the signing. He only looked once at Jonah across the table in the temporary command habitat and gave the smallest nod, the kind men gave when history had beaten them cleanly and all that remained was arithmetic. Mira became the bridge between a dead golden age and a species trying to sprint with stone tools in its hands. She slept little. Ate less. Yelled at generals, physicists, ministers, launch directors, and once at Jonah himself for bleeding on a set of interface schematics she had spent 16 hours stabilizing. She took the ship's impossible designs and broke them into things current hands could build without dying on contact. Around the Mojave bunker, the desert rose into a city of steel, ceramic, cables, flame towers, launch rails and fabrication halls bright enough to be seen from orbit. People began calling it the Forge before any official name survived long enough to matter. Jonah hated being watched. That became unfortunate because after the broadcast every eye on Earth eventually found him. He was not a politician and made a terrible symbol when cameras wanted comfort. He never smiled on cue. He answered questions too directly. When a reporter once asked him how it felt to become the face of humanity's return to the stars, he looked at the orbital timer behind her and said, "Bad timing for vanity, isn't it?" People trusted him more after that. He did not lead because he sounded grand. He led because he sounded like a man who understood that fear was real and useless in equal measure. On the 36th day, the first segment of the new Aegis lattice locked into orbit. It was not elegant yet. Not like the old projections Kepri 7 carried in memory. The original grid had looked like art. Humanity's rebuilt version looked like urgency welded to mathematics. Thick black relay towers, shield nodes wrapped in radiation armor, ugly service trusses, spinning reactor cages, patched modular anchors built from anything that could survive launch and hold a charge. It was a barricade made by a species building with bleeding hands. It was magnificent. Children watched the live feeds from schools turned emergency assembly centers. Miners in the asteroid belt cheered over delayed comm links. Dockworkers in flooded coastal ports stopped for whole minutes at a time to stare at the growing net of defense stations crossing the sky over Earth like a promise dragged into existence by force. On the 40th day the stars changed. Not all at once. A section of darkness near the outer monitor feed simply became wrong. Then denser. Then moving. The Devourer swarm had arrived. Sirens rolled across the Forge. Across military bases. Across civilian shelters. Across towers and ships and launch yards and converted stadiums where too many people now slept beside stockpiled water and printed ration packs. The old planet-wide hum of commerce was gone. In its place came a sharper sound. Readiness. In the command chamber beneath the desert, Kepri 7 opened itself around Jonah one last time. The throne closed over his spine with less violence now, though not kindness. The ship still demanded more than flesh was built to offer. But this time he did not go into the merge alone. All around him, orbit fed down into the chamber. 1,000 crews. Tens of thousands. Pilots and newly armed interceptors. Station engineers riding shield relays with trembling hands. Fire control teams on improvised defense platforms. Launch officers. Radar crews. Civilian volunteer nets. Deep space trackers. Shipwrights. Coders. Old rivals. Former enemies. A species finally pointed in one direction. Mira stood beside the throne at the auxiliary station they had built for her, one hand resting on the rail, eyes bright with exhaustion and fury. "The outer curtain is holding alignment," she said. For the moment, Jonah echoed. The first impact lit the heavens over the Pacific. The new Aegis lattice flared gold from horizon to horizon as the leading edge of the swarm struck the planetary shield. On the surface, people ran out into streets and onto rooftops despite every warning, staring upward as the night turned into a living storm of light. Millions of machine bodies hit the barrier and atomized. Millions more adapted, shifted, reformed. The pressure on the grid climbed so fast that half the relay crews went silent in fear before training brought them back. Kepri 7 rose from the desert. Not as a relic now. As a flagship. It broke through cloud and atmosphere in a sheath of warped light, punching into the high dark where Earth's new defense towers burned around it like a crown of forged suns. Behind and beside it, the first generation of human-built interceptors raced outward in ragged attack waves, too few and too fragile and absolutely unwilling to let the old war belong to ghosts alone. Jonah felt the swarm then. Cold purpose. Endless replication. Hunger without emotion. And beneath it, a terrible kind of recognition. The enemy remembered humanity. Good, Jonah whispered through clenched teeth as Kepri 7 armed the gravity spine along its hull. So do we. The battle that followed was seen from every surviving screen on Earth. Kepri 7 bent the dark itself into weapons, tearing corridors through the machine tide with pulses that made space shimmer and break. Human interceptors plunged through those corridors, dropping fusion lances and ablative kill clouds into the exposed mass. Orbiting relay towers overloaded one by one, holding the Aegis line together long enough for replacement nodes to slide into place. Improvised gun platforms died by the dozens. Civilian freight tugs rammed crippled swarm clusters when they ran out of ammunition. Deep in the forge, automated foundries printed new drone killers faster than launch crews could load them. It was not clean. It was not noble. It was human. And because it was human, it refused to stop. At the height of the assault, when the swarm concentrated into a spear aimed at the North American shield sector and every warning in the chamber turned red, Myra's voice cut through the noise. Jonah, now. He gave Kepri 7 the command and felt the old warship open its heart. The gravity spine fired once. Not a beam. Not a blast. A fold. Space ahead of the dreadnought pinched inward around the densest mass of the swarm, compressing millions of machine bodies into a singular screaming point of impossible pressure. For one frozen second the battle seemed to hold its breath. Then the point collapsed and inverted, and the resulting shock wave ripped through the enemy front like judgment made physical. The spear broke. The rest of the swarm wavered. Human pilots saw it first and drove harder. Relay crews rerouted power with their hands bleeding on manual controls. Ground batteries emptied everything they had left into the breach. Across every channel from orbit to surface, one message began spreading without order and without origin, taken up by millions because it was the only thing that fit. Push. So humanity pushed. By dawn the first wave was in retreat. Not destroyed. Kepri 7 made that clear at once. The swarm was too vast, too old, too distributed to die in a single battle. But the machine mass that had come to take Earth as an easy harvest turned away burning, fragmented, and diminished, leaving a halo of wreckage glittering above the shielded world. For the first time in 50,000 years, the enemy had reached Terra and failed. When the merge released him, Jonah almost collapsed out of the throne. Mira caught him before he hit the deck, laughing and crying at the same time because the alternative was probably to break apart. Around them the chamber lights softened from war red to dawn gold. Above, through the tactical dome, Earth turned in the black with the newborn Aegis lattice gleaming around it and a scattered fleet of damaged human ships holding the line where no line had existed 40 days before. They're falling back, Mira whispered. Jonah looked up at the planet, at the stations, the interceptors, the scarred relay towers, the debris fields, the first human defense fleet in an age beyond counting. For now, he said. Kepri 7's voice moved through the chamber like distant thunder made calm. Confirmed. Enemy first wave repelled. Additional machine civilizations and deeper swarm strata remain beyond mapped space. Probability of renewed conflict, certain. Mira let out a breath that might have been a laugh. Of course it is. Jonah pushed himself upright and stepped toward the observation span, every muscle in his body aching, blood dried at one nostril, eyes fixed on the world below. Cities were still burning in places. Orbital sectors were wrecked. Millions were afraid. Thousands were dead. Nothing about survival had come cheap. But Earth was still there. Not hiding. Not sleeping. Building. Below them, the planet's night side glittered with new construction arrays already rising where old governments had once argued over borders. Shipyards were being laid down in orbit. Launch trails were climbing from 6 continents. Humanity had not become peaceful. It had become awake. Jonah rested one hand against the black inner hull of the last dreadnought and watched the first formation of newly commissioned defense cruisers ignite their drives beyond the moon. "Let them come again," he said softly. Far out in the dark, beyond the retreating wreckage of the first wave, other red lights were already gathering. This time Earth saw them early. This time Earth was armed. And this time, when the universe looked toward humanity expecting ashes, it found a species standing in its own fire and building a fleet.